So our guest today draws on psychology and a range of tried and true practical strategies in helping parents with some very difficult problems. Dr. Mary Sheedy Kurcinka, a parenting educator and author of several books, including what I have here, Raising Your Spirited Child and Sleepless in America. Mary's next book, Raising Your Spirited Baby, is due to be released later this year and is sure to be a great read for any new parent. Thank you very much for making the time to talk with me today, Mary.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Great, thanks. I just want to begin by saying that I think people will find it particularly valuable to hear advice, not just for parenting generally, but also to help them cope with in-house family tension during the coronavirus pandemic. Just to start with, it might be helpful if we can give people a general idea of the perspective you take and the kinds of topics you discuss. To help with various parenting issues, you seem to identify basic human needs such as sleep or relaxation that aren't always met. And you talk about how we vary from person to person in terms of how those needs must be met. And then you give really great examples of what people can do and how they can structure their days to achieve harmony in their home and their lives. I've been thinking about this. You kind of take a principled approach that's also context sensitive. So it's sensitive and flexible to what's going on, but it's definitely principled. And I really love that. I think that's a real hallmark of genuinely good work. Could you tell us a bit about your method and your perspective on parenting, Mary?
Well, I think one of the things that's unique about my work is I consider the entire family system. And so as I'm working with parents and their children, we're not just focusing on the well-being of the child, but also the well-being of the adults, because children sync to our stress levels.
Yeah.
And so, several things that I talk about. One is understanding who's come to live with you. Each child arrives in this world with their own style of reacting to the world around them. And so some children, by their very nature, are more intense and sensitive and committed to their goals than other children. And as a parent, it's critical to understand that this child gets upset easier and faster and stays upset longer, not because they're trying to be difficult, but because of the way they're wired. And so as a parent, you begin to understand and identify what do they need to stay calm. What triggers them? How can I help them to calm before they're melting down and screaming and crying and throwing things or spitting? So it's really working with who is this person and how do we bring them in? How do we meet that child's needs, but do so in a way that also helps them to function smoothly and peacefully and joyfully within our family?
One of your big things is the category of spirited children, and you've identified this class of children. It's a great term. It describes children who, as you've alluded to, are intense, sensitive, perceptive, persistent, and energetic. They adapt to new situations slower. They're more prone to meltdowns. I've seen advice in other places that you've cautioned. You mentioned in a few places, like, some things just don't work with a particularly intense child. And, so it's clearly a good term to have. So I've got two questions for you. How did you come to seeing the need for the category? I think you might have kind of answered that. You talked about, obviously, some kids a bit more intense. But for people who aren't familiar with the term, could you just elaborate a little bit more about just what makes up a spirited child and how you can identify one?
So I came to it on a very personal basis. When I had my first child, I was working in the field of parent education. So I'd been teaching classes for parents. I had degrees in child development and family social science. And in the state where I lived, we actually had a program for parents through the public school system, offering classes to any parent with a child from birth to kindergarten. So I'm teaching in this class, and I have my son, and he is beautiful. I mean, he's this beautiful baby, but he's incredibly sensitive and intense. And so many of the strategies from the curriculums that I've been teaching, especially strategies like, well, ignore them and it'll stop. Yeah. Or, don't respond too quickly. Give them a chance to self-regulate or calm. Absolutely did not work with this child, because if you didn't respond very quickly, then he would get so upset that he would be upset for an extended period of time. And so I began to recognize, first I'm thinking, what am I doing wrong? And what am I doing teaching parent education? Maybe I should quit. But I didn't, and instead started researching. And, why was this? And I came across the research on temperament and how we are each born with unique styles of interacting with the world. And as I said earlier, that there's differences in intensity level, differences in energy level, and how quickly you transition from one thing to another or deal with surprises. And then I began to see in my classes that there were always other children like my son, that people would say, well, I just set up a reward system and it worked. Well, again, that doesn't usually work for these kids, because the issue is helping them to regulate that arousal system, helping them to understand when they start to get bubbly inside, recognizing it as a parent, and taking steps to help them calm.
It seems like if you've got different temperaments, then maybe you need to cater your care to the child. Is there any prospect for like a one size fits all approach? It seems like if one approach doesn't work for everyone, well, there must be a better one that can fit everything into it, right? So, like, it seems like your approach is better because it deals with the harder cases. But does it also work with other kids? Are there benefits to the more conventional, or I wouldn't say that yours is unconventional, but just your standard models and what you were taught?
Absolutely, it does work with all children, and people will say every parent should read Raising Your Spirited Child.
That's why I think that. Yes. Because it's like, it doesn't matter if your child's particularly intense. It's good to know this stuff anyway.
Well, and every child has their spirited child moments.
Yeah.
So even if they're not always, but I think the key with it is the spirited child needs that unique approach that addresses what are they feeling and needing, and then again, how do we work with them? And one thing I want to stress is that being spirited is not an excuse for poor behavior. People say, oh, he can't help it, he's spirited. I'm like, no, that's not how we address this. What we address is, this is difficult for him, so let's talk about what skills he needs to develop in order to be successful in this situation. How do we break that down into steps? For one example, as you said in the beginning, was sleep. So many of these children as infants need to be in contact to sleep. So they need physical touch. And so then we run into the advice of, lay them down, lay them on their back, and this baby immediately startles awake. So then they don't nap. And then they get overtired. And so I talk about, we're going to practice laying them down once, because practice makes better, but we're only going to do that once. And when it doesn't work, then we're going to pick them up and we're going to hold them for the rest of that nap, whether it's we sit and hold them, or we put them in a pack or a backpack or a stroller. because sleep is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And then as we continue to gently nudge them, one day we lay them down, and because we've practiced it at least once each day, they sleep for 20 minutes without being held. And again, we get there quickly. We don't wait for them to get fully aroused. If they wake after 20 minutes, we pick them up and hold them and let them finish that nap. But the next day, we lay them down again. And pretty soon, one day, wait a minute, they slept longer than 20 minutes. And so we're doing this supported practice of the skills. And that's what this child needs, that we break it into small steps so that we don't overwhelm them.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, so the spirited children, so there's a lot to talk about. So if anyone does have particularly intense children, they've got to definitely read this stuff, and I'd recommend it anyway. But given your experience with spirited children, and of course with the coronavirus, we're all locked inside, I think something people would be interested to hear about is what do you do when the child's having a meltdown, when they're frustrated and throwing a particularly, throwing a tantrum or a strong one. Yeah, just to stop you on that. So before you start, spirited children can have tantrums for like hours, is it?
I wouldn't say hours, but
yeah.
certainly
But
they can have
can,
very intense one, reaction, and it can easily last 15, 30, 45 minutes.
Yeah, 45 minutes is a long time. Yeah,
it is a long time.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, not hours.
So there's going to be two steps in order to, or two key components to preventing those meltdowns.
Yep.
One is preventive. You absolutely have to protect the sleep of these children. And because they are so alert and active and intense as well, people often think they need less sleep because they have difficulty falling asleep. And so in raising your spirited child, I talk about creating that daily routine, the regular wake times and meals, and sleep times. Set the body clock, so we get the body clock working with us, and recognizing the sleep routine. So for some children, a bath is calming. Many spirited children, a bath is alerting. So it has to come out of the sleep routine. The same with books. Spirited kids tend to be highly imaginative and bright children, and so sometimes reading calms, but sometimes it actually alerts. So I work with parents, first of all, to help them create that routine that the child gets.
I've got a little friend with me, and he's just jumping around.
I should have brought in my Rozzy. He's a doodle.
I'm listening, but he's just jumping around on me. Yeah.
And then the second thing is, so we get that in place. That's going to reduce the frequency and the intensity of the meltdowns, because to respond in a caring way is impossible if it's happening 100 times a day. So we get the structure in place, and then that gives us the patience and energy that when something happens, we have enough energy to respond sensitively. So the first thing is actually, spirited kids need to be heard. There's a feeling and need behind that. So the first thing, might be a child says, no, I'm not getting on my coat, or something like that. And instead of saying, yes, you are, which is like, throwing kerosene on a fire, we stop and we say, I'm listening. I hear you don't want to put on your coat. Tell me more. What about putting on that coat don't you like? And we actually, it's not that I think it's important to remember, listening doesn't mean you agree. Doesn't mean he's not going to put on his coat. It means I need to understand the problem. Of it's the tag, or I don't want to go. I'm scared about going. And then we can figure out, okay, how do we fix this or make this better? But a key is simply how our initial words of, I'm listening, I will help you. Because those words immediately calm and get him to turn to you and look at you, and now he can hear you and work with you. And then, once we've done our listening, we can start figuring out what to do.
Yeah. So engage in it without fighting, without running from it, without freezing up. You're just engaging with the problem, and it doesn't mean you retreat. It doesn't mean you give up ground. It doesn't also mean you get in there aggressively. Yeah, that's really nice.
It doesn't mean that we're going to do what they're going to ask, what they're asking to do. We're not giving them necessarily what it is they're demanding, but we're stopping to hear what is that, what about this don't you like?
So obviously meltdowns, managing the tension before they get to the meltdown. So when they're having a meltdown, is there anything you can do when they're having a meltdown? Just doesn't matter what happens then? You just weather the storm, or the point is to focus on preventing the meltdown, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we want to prevent it, and there's signs, there's cues that it's building. So say you have two children, and the children have been playing together, and they've been playing well, and then all of a sudden you hear somebody's voice getting louder, or suddenly somebody's starting to forget a rule, or they're just starting to get a little irritated. That's the point to step in. And we kind of always hope we're wrong. It's like, well, maybe if I just finish this up, they'll be fine. But that's actually the point to step in, because they haven't lost it yet. That's what I call the yellow zone. It's like, it's that yellow light of, things are going to fall apart here. But if we step in, it's much easier to calm them at that point, versus you wait until they're hitting each other, they've pushed, and now they're losing it. And so again, with the losing it, that if I come into the room at that point and I say to them, hey guys, you were having fun, now you're not. I'll help you, instead of who did what, and did you push your brother? And even obviously we have to stop aggressive behaviors. But again, my first words affect whether the intensity level goes higher or lower.
Yeah, these are warning signs to look out for when to engage. Those warning signs before you get to that point, and that's what you're going to be focusing on. To manage your tension, and that's absolutely right. So, okay.
Raising your spirited child, there's in the chapter on intensity, there's cue charts that actually you can read through and see, okay, in the green zone, they look at you, they're calm energy, they're focused, and they're listening, and they're flexible. That's our ideal zone, that green zone. And then the yellow is, they're looking away, they're starting to lose focus, the voice is getting a little louder. And again, either if we ignore that, they're likely to just amp up and go into the red zone and lose it. But if we step in and say, hey, how about if we stop and go outside and take a break, or hey, it's snack time, let's have a snack, that will recenter them. And by the red zone, that's when they're yelling, can't look at you, can't hear you, they're not listening, not working with you, they're gone.
Let's focus on the yellow zone and helping there.
Yes.
I like that. That's so there. I mean, a big part of the book is the different traits. I won't go into them. I think there's about 5. But then in addition to that, you have the most stable personality trait, which is introversion and extroversion. And the point I wanted to say or the question I wanted to ask is, depending on your personality, you'll find some situations more stressful, and you'll also be rejuvenated by other situations, and they'll be different. So, And I just wanted to focus on introversion and extroversion because you say it's the most stable personality trait and it's probably the most obvious.
Yes,
I don't
and
know
I
if it's
think
most obvious, but yeah.
during this time of social distancing, it's also very obvious in our families. So the introvert, the key with introversion is introverts can be very social people. They've been highly socially skilled. And I think that's an important thing, is that introvert doesn't mean you're shy. It doesn't mean you don't like people. It means that in order to recharge and to come into that green zone of calm energy, you need quiet, you need space, you need a break from interaction during the day. You need those breaks. You may be the life of the party, but when you come home, now you're done. The extrovert recharges with stimulation. They want activity. They seek interaction. And so the social distancing now is, or I should say physical distancing.
Physical, they say now, but
can be challenging because you may not be getting that normal social interaction. And so that's where Zoom and other technology tools are great ways to have that interaction with them. But I think with children is you have to be really careful with your little introverts that you don't overprogram them, because after an activity, they don't want to go to another one. They want to come home and to just have some downtime. Doesn't mean that they want to be alone. They may love to be with mom or dad, or in fact, they may be your favorite pal, but they just need a break from the crowds and the stimulation. And often in public situations, this is the child who may fall apart or takes off. They're like, I've had enough. I'm out of here. And people think they're running away. Well, what they're doing is trying to get a break from the stimulation level. And for the extroverts, they need the interaction, but again, it doesn't mean that they can't learn to work independently. We can again start with 3 minutes of, okay, you work on the Legos, I'll get you started, and then you work on them. We'll set a timer so you know how long it'll be, and then I'll check in with you again, and we help them to build that skill to work independently, but also know after they've done that, then they need some social interaction. That's one of the things is, people again are working from home right now, is I've worked out of my home for decades. And initially when I did that, I started getting very drained because I am an extrovert, and I learned I needed to start my day with a few phone calls and have that interaction. And then I could, write for the next 3 hours. And that those phone calls for me were not a waste of time. They were actually critical to kind of get, energize me. And so then I could write and work independently. And I think that's the most important thing for, not necessarily, and again, in raising your spirited child, there's information about that is, one, how do you identify, is your child more introvert or extroverted? Because it's apparent even in infancy. And then more importantly, than the terms is, what do I need right now? Do I need interaction? Do I need a break? Do I need some outside stimulation? Do I need some peace and quiet? And helping children to understand that becomes very important in helping them, again, to regulate and to stay in that zone of calm energy.
Before you have to go, Mary, I just wanted to ask you about sleep. Again, we talked about it earlier with babies. And obviously it's very important. You've got a whole book. This whole book is about sleep.
Sleepless in America, yes.
That's great. So having a routine is good. so kids can have a regular, that predictably know when they need to wind down, go to sleep. Some kids need to wind down more than others, you mentioned. But do you have any tips for parents for when the schedule gets derailed and bedtime gets pushed back? What happens then, and what happens to kids when they don't get enough sleep? Just, you've got to go, but if you can.
Right. So when children don't get enough sleep, that's that is a major fuel source for the tantrums, the sibling fighting. Meals are disrupted. They're too tired to eat. Their sleep becomes disrupted, ironically, even though they're overtired, because their adrenal system had to kick in to keep them going. And so they actually wake more frequently, and just not listening, inflexible. They're just inflexible. They can't problem solve with you. I had one parent I had worked with, and I wrote this in the book she said, I thought my child just had a crabby personality. And the reality is a well-rested child is overall happy. They wake on their own. If you're waking your child in the morning, they are not getting enough sleep. That's a red flag that your child is not getting enough sleep. And overall, they're happy, and they even if they're spirited, they are more flexible than if they're tired. And there's two pieces to it. And again, in both Sleepless in America and Raising Your Spirited Child, preschoolers need on average 12 hours of sleep. So if they wake in the morning at 6 a.m. and don't nap, they need their head on the pillow at 6 p.m. at night, which isn't going to happen in most families. And so for many children, I put a nap back in, so that we can have some evening time together. And even school-age children, a 6-year-old can still need 11 hours of sleep. And I think we're actually seeing that now, because people don't have to rush out of the house in the morning, that they are sleeping more. And then for parents, that's the other, is if you don't have enough sleep, you miss the cues, you don't have the patience, and children sink to our stress level. So protecting your own sleep is just as important as protecting your children's.
So I just want to ask you just this last question before you go, Mary. So with the coronavirus pandemic, people being inside, I was going to talk about before about waking up and starting the day right, and how that can help with going to sleep. But I wanted to know if you have any advice for people in home. And I'm thinking, a lot of people might be tempted to let them watch TV in the morning and to use the devices and that kind of thing, or screens and their phones. But you mentioned in the book, starting the day by switching the body to being awake can be a really good thing for getting them ready to go to bed at night, and also for having like a buffer for stress during the day as well. You mentioned, having breakfast together as a family, not having that stimulation and just being relaxed can be really important. So I was kind of thinking, I don't want to answer the question for you, but I was thinking, that might be a really good thing for people. Let the kids sleep, but then try to get them active, get some light, eat. You also mentioned eating can also turn the body on to being awake, changing the temperature of the body. What are some just some tips for people as they're hunkering down?
So I think a key thing is to maintain some type of routine. And, even though we don't have to be out of the house, I would maintain a regular wake time, because that's your cornerstone. Everything builds from that morning wake time. And if that sometimes
have a regular wake time.
A regular wake time, because then from there is breakfast and lunch and naps and dinner and bedtime. And
so do we let them sleep in, or what do we do? What do we do about that? Just wake them up.
You know, I'm going to say establish a family wake time.
Okay.
So whatever, and I might be noting where my kids are waking naturally and establish it there. The other thing that I
you
now
mentioned that. Yeah, I remember that.
talk about is that you as the adult try to wake 30 minutes or earlier than the kids, so you get some me time before the demands of children, so that you center, because that sets the tone for the rest of the morning. But that then you have that morning routine, and that they wake. I'm going to still encourage them to get dressed so we can go outside. That we wake, we dress before we leave the sleeping area, because every time you go upstairs, downstairs, in a room, out of a room, that's a transition. That opens you to a power struggle. So have that morning routine, come together for breakfast, ban the electronics at this point, because think of how many fights we have about turning on and off electronics. And maybe the first thing we do after breakfast is, if it's possible, is to get outside for some exposure to morning light and a walk or some exercise. And then start our day with schoolwork or playtime or whatever it's going to be. But that regular morning wake time, that's your cornerstone. You can't make kids sleep, but we can set that family wake time and build from there.
Yeah, I like that. That's really really nuanced answer to the question. It was really great. Okay, Mary, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a real pleasure, and we wish you all the best during the pandemic.
The same to you, Paul, and thank you.
Yeah. Okay,
it's great talking with you.
Okay.